Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar Growth During Crisis, sponsored by Key Process Innovations, Perkins & Company, and True North Partners. This is the second of 3 webinars that we have presented. The next one will be next week on Wednesday at 12:30. And this is a process for managing your business through crisis, difficult times that we're in. This is a way to actually think about it in advance, during, and after the crisis is heading towards finish. Just as in spring, there is growth that comes up after the wintertime, and it is because there are several ingredients that go into the process of making plants grow and thrive. It takes water, sunshine, light, and heat, and that gives the plants the opportunity to grow. There are ingredients during crisis that actually allow us to grow and to thrive as well, and we're going to spend the time talking today about leveraging new opportunities during crisis. First, let me introduce you to the presenters. Presenting the very first webinar was Don Beelan, a principal at Perkins & Company, and his company specifically specializes in ownership transitions, business succession, advanced corporate and personal planning for business owners and affluent individuals. Julie Marquis presenting today, Key Process Innovations, the managing director, and her company is dedicated to enhancing company profitability by focusing on leadership, sales, and innovation. And then Scott Phillips, me, managing partner of True North Partners. We specialize in family business transitions, strategic management, business optimization, succession planning, and leadership development. So you'll see more about each of these folks and be able to talk to them later today. Why this webinar? We asked ourselves, why are we doing this? What is the purpose in making this happen? And there are a lot of people doing webinars these days. One of the key pieces to doing an effective webinar right now is really having an understanding of the process of going into a crisis, dealing with it in the midst of it, and then coming back out of it on the backside in a positive and successful way. So the first thing we decided that it made sense is to find a way to improve the chances of leading your company out of the crisis in a way that actually makes you stronger than weaker. Secondly, to answer some of the strategic questions that have come up, both in terms of what to do now and what to do in the future. Third, to minimize the risk and leverage future opportunities and the opportunities that actually exist in this moment when it's not real clear. And then lastly, how do you get to have some momentum coming out of the crisis as well. The webinar, again, series is 3 segments, and the first one was last week, the next one is today, and the last one is next week, June 3rd at 12:30. So we're looking forward to having you join us at that particular time. We will have questions throughout the webinar, and we'll stop and take those questions, and Julie and Don will answer some of those questions as we get into it. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Julie Marquis. Julie.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Welcome to everybody. I appreciate you taking time and joining us for this webinar. Before I kind of get into the leveraging new opportunities, I want to kind of show you the process that we looked at. And what was important for us was we understand that everybody's kind of gone through this plan and prepare. And that was at the beginning of the crisis. It was how are we going to keep our businesses moving forward, and what are the steps that we need to do as we kind of enter into this. Last week, Don started talking about kind of how to respond and how do we make sure that we're going to be safe during this period of time, including watching your financials and communicating and focusing on all the individuals, the stakeholders, and the owners. Today, we're going to talk about ways so you can leverage some of these new opportunities as we start to merge out of this phase and move into the next phase of the pandemic. And then next week, I think this is an important part is how we're going to replan and re-prepare, because this may take a little bit more time than perhaps even the plan and prepare, because we really want to make sure that as we emerge out of this, that we are going to be much stronger and we're prepared to adapt to this new lifestyle that's going to happen due to this COVID. What's important, though, is that we look at underneath there, we've got 3 boxes there, and all the 3 of these need to be happening throughout this entire process. So it's important that you're communicating with your employees, your stakeholders, your suppliers, your customers, and communication is always going to be critical during that. We also want to make sure that we're tracking and measuring, because even though businesses might have been shuttered or they're slowed down, there are still some key performance indicators that need to be measured, tracked, and followed, just in case you need to make some adjustments to your plan. And then obviously it's important that you manage your cash flow. And there was a lot of talk about preserving cash. I mean, last week, Dawn talked a little bit about it's more important to have cash and liquidity versus profitability, because you're going to need some cash as you start to come out of this, move on to the next phase. So all 3 of those are important to keep an eye on throughout the entire process. So we're going to start to talk about how to leverage new opportunities, but I'm actually going to start out with how to minimize risk, and just so we can, that's the important part of it. And as you start to look at moving into this next phase, you need to understand kind of what your risks are. And I will tell you, one place to go would be the CDC website. And the CDC has actually put together a health and safety steps for specific occupations. And I've actually read through quite a bit of this. And it can be a little bit dry, but I think the only thing worse than reading the CDC guidelines is actually writing the CDC guidelines. So spend some time on there, because there's a lot of great information that can really help you as you start to plan, move forward, and start to understand the risks that you could be facing with your specific organization. The other thing you can do is start to gather some best practices from people within your industry or similar industries. When this first happened, I was on the phone with a lot of CEOs and owners saying, hey, what are you working on? What do you need? And what are some solutions that you've come up with? And one of the things that came up was, hey, we've heard that this virus can only last about 72 hours on any sort of surface. So one of my manufacturing clients said, we're going to 4/10. Now we're going to get 3 people out of the plant for 3 days. It's going to minimize our risk. I said, that's a great idea. Kind of carried that on and shared that with some other manufacturers. The other topic that came up a lot was, how do you handle the time clocks? Because time clocks are an area where employees are going to gather right at the beginning of the shift, end of the shift, possibly at break time. And how do we minimize that and also make sure that we're capturing the information that we need in order to make sure employees are paid appropriately? So I was able to share some best practices between different manufacturers and kind of find some ideas on ways to minimize that risk. So don't be afraid to reach out to me or any of us on this webinar if you've got some questions about some specific areas that you're working on, and maybe we have some ideas from other companies that we could share with you. And the other thing is that you could do what I call it's a COVID FMEA, and you may not be familiar with the failure mode effect analysis. It's basically a risk management tool, and this is some way that you could look at your entire process and have an idea of which areas within your process do you need to be concerned about your employees coming in contact with COVID. And it can be, FMEAs can be very arduous, but don't get caught up in all of that. Just kind of lay out the process and just think, okay, where are these specific areas that we've got some risk? And I do want to point out to you that unlike other types of FMEAs, this one, you really need to look at what the employee is doing, because I had one of my clients had a near miss with a COVID. They thought they had COVID with one of their employees, because it turns out the employees were sharing food in the break room. So obviously, if you did a regular FMEA, you probably would not have caught that. But so keep in mind of kind of, we're really looking at COVID and how it impacts the employee. Do you have any questions?
Yes, Julie, one of the questions that came up here was, how do you balance risk with performance in an organization, especially during this COVID time?
So I guess it would depend on what particular aspect of the business you're talking about, but I think at this point, it's been very clear that the health and safety of the employees is the most important part of it. And I would really spend some time thinking about what are those specific risks? How can you mitigate them? What sort of controls can you put in place so that you can still be successful? So I would look at different types of controls that you can put in place so you can minimize that, so that you can maximize your performance. Does that answer your question?
That answers the question, yes.
All right.
Julie, one other question that comes to mind is when you identify and you go through your FMEA process, what is the communication process with the employees to share what you find and to educate them about these exposures?
I think, I mean, you can involve them in the process so they're aware of it and they can kind of give some input, which is a great way to do it. But I think at the point where you say, this is the exposure risk that we think we have, and here are the options for controls that we can put in place, and talk about the decision and what decision the management team has made as far as to minimize that. I mean, obviously wearing a mask is kind of a controversial type decision, but having seen what just happened up in Clark County, maybe you just need to require everybody wear a mask, and that will take care of it. So I think it's talking through the decisions you made, the risks, and then why you made the decisions are really important.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's talk about how to maximize efficiencies. And I would say, if you were honest with yourself and you looked at this current state of your business, you would say that since you started your business until where you are now, you've probably grown quite a bit. And that would say you've grown in additional equipment, new processes, you have additional revenue, you have more employees. And if you were to do it all over again, knowing what you know now, you would probably set up your processes different. Your plan might be different. And I think this is an opportunity for you to look at what the requirements are from the CDC. 6 foot perimeter is one of them. And how can you take advantage of that in order to streamline your flow? So let me give you an example. I had a client of mine that they had a lot of waste in their process. And by waste, I mean that this particular example is operators were standing around waiting for a cycle to complete before they could move on to the next batch. So they would load the parts into the machine, and then they would take the parts that just came out, they'd go over to another department and leave them there and come back and wait. So they said, well, how can we leverage that so we don't have as much waiting time for the operator? And what they realized was they could line up a number of pieces of equipment, and from there, the operator could go from a piece of equipment to piece of equipment to piece of equipment. And so they had them modify the batch size and the cycle time, but what they had was a kind of a continuous flow of the operator, no more waste, increased productivity, increased throughput, and they've also created this 6 foot barrier around there. So if you start to think about how is it that I could standardize this flow so that it's going to be much more even and consistent, that's a great way to maximize your throughput. We also have a different perspective on how our employees look at their work. Some people have been working from home, some people haven't been working at all, but we have a different view on our work. And this is a real opportunity for us to leverage that in order to move forward. I would say that the focus has moved from more hourly work, how many hours do I need to work, to how productive do I need to be? And when you have that idea, people are going to be much more engaged in how can I do my work differently and better. And there's also some people that might be sitting at home a little bit scared to come to work. And they've probably been thinking about where those areas are that they need to be concerned. And so tap into that, because they probably have some great ideas on how they can do things better. And they're probably much more interested in talking about it now. And you may be more open to hearing what they have to say. So if you combine the opportunity to kind of make some changes to your organization, to your processes, to your equipment, to your manufacturing floor, you combine that with employees that are engaged and excited because they realize changes have to be made, and now they have an opportunity to actually help implement those. You have an opportunity to reduce waste, to increase throughput, and that will actually allow you to increase your productivity. It'll increase your capacity, and it could and ultimately will increase your profitability. Do you have any
Question for you, Julie.
Yeah.
This is maybe a difficult one, but how do you balance keeping your employees employed and working while maximizing efficiencies when labor is often a big area of efficiency improvement?
Well, I mean, that's always a tough question. And my experience with almost every business owner that I've worked with is they genuinely care about their employees. And so the idea of doing that and streamlining things and maybe be able to take some employees out, the idea isn't to get rid of the employees, it's to find a more effective way to use them. And so think about, there are some jobs that can be replaced by automation, but those people still they have another way to contribute. And so be aware of that and be willing to train and develop these people so that they can continue to be members of your team. Because I don't think the goal would be just, hey, let's just cut heads and we're not going to worry about it. These owners, presidents, they really do care about their employees, and they really do want to find ways to use them more effectively and more efficiently.
I think there's also an opportunity during this time in terms of maximizing efficiencies by taking people, as you mentioned, training them into new areas, but invariably there are other opportunities that exist within the organization that can be, these people can be reassigned that allow you to expand and to look at things in a more holistic way, maybe adding some things that you've always wanted to add, but never really took the time, as you said, to move people and pieces and parts around to make that possible.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, the thing, Scott, just to tag on to that, because what I'm hearing that might be interested, Julie, in your perspective, but it seems like to maximize efficiencies, even though it's somewhat inefficient to do this, is look at your cross-training plans, identify various skill sets and where you can cross-train your workforce so you have more flexibility in how you allocate resources.
Absolutely. I wrote a blog about that, about kind of how to go about approaching that. And I had one of my clients actually said we had a whole training matrix. You'd walk into the plant and there it was, and they had, the level of training that each employee had in each specific position. And he said, you want to make more money? You have to learn more positions. So everybody wanted to get trained on new positions. And he said, however, in order for you to be trained on a new position, you have to train someone on your position. Nice. So it kind of created that, hey, you got to help somebody up before you can move to another opportunity for training. And it was amazing how well that workforce could move from department to department as resources were needed, and then you deploy accordingly. So,
great idea.
Fantastic.
So you are probably thinking, oh, great, I want to implement improvements. I want to improve productivity, and I want to improve my profitability, but how do I do that? So let's talk a little bit about that. First thing I want to share with you is process flow mapping. And I was not really a big fan of this tool for a number of years. And I said, well, everybody knows the process. Why do you have to map it out? But a few years ago, I was retooling the process control class for the Investment Casting Institute. And we wanted to teach the students how to apply process control tools in the investment casting industry. And we wanted to do it in a way that was extremely interactive. And we kind of we wanted to give the students a scenario and have them work through the scenario and learn how to use these tools. So we had to kind of be a step ahead of them on what questions they were going to ask so we could provide the necessary information. And it was very, very complicated, and we were all struggling. And then I said, I laid out the whole process on a map, and I said, okay, here's the decision trees, here's what we need to do, handed it over to the team, and it was a game changer. And from that point, that is the tool that we use when we're teaching this class, because all of a sudden we can see it. We know what needs to happen, when it needs to happen. It's been great. So ever since then, I have started using this tool with all of my clients, and it is amazing what you can do when you put everybody together and you lay out the process, because you're going to find out if there are people that are doing things differently. You're going to find out where the inefficiencies are, and together you're going to be able to lay this out and go, oh, wow, well, if we were to move this step over here, this would be so much more effective and so much more efficient. So absolutely having a visual representation of the process is very, very valuable. And the idea is that you're going to identify some inefficiencies. And when I talk about inefficiencies, what I'm talking about are non-value added steps. And non-value added steps, I define as steps that the customer is not willing to pay for. So I'll give you an example. It's a little bit controversial, but I am not a fan of in-process quality checks by a quality technician. I understand that may need to happen in aerospace or some other types of work, but for the most part, the person that is actually doing the work is the one that is engaged in what they're doing. And if you put somebody else to come in and check that, they're going to kind of take a step back from what they're doing. They're saying, it's not important. I don't need to look at all the details because someone else is going to come in and check my work. And that mindset, I have a hard time with that mindset, because I really want the operator, they're engaged in it. Let them check their work and let them know that if it's right, it's going to move on. But if it's not, that's their responsibility. And that, to me, it's not something customers want to pay for. They don't want to pay for in-process quality checks. So we want to find ways to be able to remove some of those steps. And by walking through this process, you'll be able to figure out what some of that waste is. Another tool that you can use are Kaizen events. And you may or may not be familiar with this. That's basically means continuous improvement. And if you look up Kaizen events, you're going to see it's very structured and you have to follow the certain way to do that. Don't get caught up in all of that. That's not that important. What's important is that you have this mindset they're always trying to get better. And I would just say, pick a department, pick a particular area of your process, and get your team together and say, hey, we need to make some improvements here. I had one of my clients that they had a problem. They were losing about 13% of their work every day looking for parts. They were looking for parts and for tools. Couldn't find the tools, didn't know where they were, kind of wandering around the whole plant trying to find them. And I said that's not sustainable. We need to do something about that. So I put them all in a room and said, here's the objective. I don't care what the solution is, but I want you guys to come together and figure out what you think needs to happen. And I left. And I came back and their solution was fantastic. Their execution, they knew what they needed to do. They needed a couple of resources from me, which I gave them, and they continued on and took care of it. So you don't have to be in the middle of all these continuous improvement activities. You just need to set the expectation that we're always trying to get better. And doing these Kaizen events can really help get the operators and the employees involved in what they're doing.
So Julie, on that, what would you suggest as incentive for the workforce or the individuals in the production line to pursue continuous improvement? What is the incentive? What's the benefit to them?
Well, I think part of that is asking them what their pain points are, and what's keeping them from being able to do the work that they want to do. And if that may kind of spur something. The other thing is, what is it about your job that you like the most? And when they start talking about that, and it's like, what's keeping you from doing more of that? And they're going to start talking about those things. And once you kind of dig into that, from there, you'll be able to figure out what you need to be working on. So that was how this particular tool search thing happened, was what's keeping you from doing what you want to do. And they brought that up. I didn't bring it up. So I think it's important to just involve them and ask those questions and then be open to hearing what they have to say.
Thank you.
Julie, we have another question that came in. I'm a small company, 20 employees, and don't have the bench strength or specialists to take on new projects. What can I do to get this work done? So as you apply it specifically to Kaizen events or process mapping, if you're a small company, how do you actually recommend dealing with that?
Well, you don't have to have a whole day of any of this. You can do this in short bursts. You can do that in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. So don't feel like you have to invest a whole lot of time initially. And I think that's the first point. And the second one is, I would believe that your operators are not quite as efficient as they need to be. And I think if you start focusing on efficiencies and exactly what they're doing, you'll be able to carve out a little bit of time in order to start this process. And I think once you start to do that, you'll see some productivity improvements, and you'll start to see some gaps in some areas where operators could be a little bit more efficient here. They would free up a little bit of time over there. But don't just start. Don't worry about how much time you have. Just start the process, and I think you'll be able to gain the momentum that you want to gain.
I also would add that it's relatively easy to prioritize what you believe are going to be the high benefit sort of actions. So you can say this particular area is going to be the likely best result, so let's start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Julie, one other question. When the Kaizen process is started, do you go about by setting targets or specific goals that are intended to be reached through this process?
You should, right? If you're going to follow the process, you should be doing that. And that's where, like, I knew with this example I gave you, I knew how much time they were spending, and I knew what it was worth, because I knew that they were spending an average of like 12% of their day looking for tools, because they had kind of measured it, and we've been doing some time studies. So we knew what the return was going to be. And so we focused on that.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's another opportunity for you, and that is to create a visual workplace. And I'm a big fan of these, and let me give you an example. If you've been to the grocery store recently, you know that there is one exit, and there's one entrance and one exit, right? And on the floor, there's little markings that tell you what direction to go. I'm not very good at those. Sometimes I find myself working backwards because I'm going the wrong way on a one-way aisle. But the grocery store has really created a visual workplace for us. And they've also made it very clear to know what 6 feet means. So 6 feet is 2 grocery carts distance. And so if you think about what is a visual workplace, imagine the grocery store right now. And when I walk into a manufacturing plant, or really anywhere, I look around and I'm trying to understand what's going on. What are we trying to do? What are the operators doing? What are the goals? And if I can't see anything but equipment, then I know we've got a problem. So you really want to label every tank that you have, every piece of equipment that you have, kind of what it's doing, what the specs are for it, how often it's checked, what the key input variables are, so that you can see all of that. And that'll help you kind of understand what's going on in there, in the department or in the plant. And then what you want to do is set some metrics for them, so that you know what does success look like in each of these departments. And that could be first pass yield, that could be number of parts generated, it can be the percent uptime for equipment. You have a lot of options, but you definitely want to put some performance metrics out there. And then you also want to make sure that you've got goals. And like Zig Ziglar said, you will hit 0% of every goal that you don't set. So set your goals so you know what it is that you're trying to achieve. And that's not just, you've got revenue goals, you've got growth goals, but each department should have their own goals as well, so they know what they're working towards. So let me give you an example of a client that I was working with, and they were struggling. It was an engineering firm. They were struggling to kind of get things through their engineering department, and it was impacting schedule and cost, because they had cost overruns and a lot of errors in their designs, and it wasn't working. So the owner asked me to come in and kind of figure out what was going on. Spent some time, figured it out, and I said one of the issues is they don't have a schedule. So they knew when their design needed to be done in the engineering department, but they didn't have a schedule for any of the steps leading up to that. So I said, all right, let's set a schedule, have the engineers pick each of the steps in the design process and say, when are you gonna have this done? When are you gonna have this done? And, they were just kind of doing that whole, I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm really uncomfortable. I'm like, well, I got to pick a date. We got to pick one. We got to have a schedule. So we set a schedule and we're following the schedule. We're still at about 36% on time projects. So, well, this isn't working. So then I set a goal and I said, I want you guys to be at 75% on time. So let's make that a goal. So they're working towards that. I'm tracking that. No change. We're still sitting about 36, 37%. Might have jumped up to 40. We're not where we need to be. And the last thing I did was I said, all right, I'm going to create a board and I'm going to make it green if your project's on time, yellow if you're behind but you can recover, or red if you are late. We're going to have a conversation with the customer. And I put that up on a board so everybody could see it. And immediately, in one day, we went from about 37% on time to 76% on time because they didn't want any reds or yellows by their name. And I have had this experience time and time again. And I know that when you create something, you have goals and people can see how everybody's performing, your whole performance will be elevated. So I have a little example here of kind of what you can create this. You can create this online. You can create this on your manufacturing floor. Just lay out the steps and the parts or the projects that you're working on, and then kind of target dates for each step and who's assigned to it. And just, you can use those little magnets and move those around, whatever you want to do. From a distance, as a manager, you can walk in, you can say, okay, that project's behind, I need to go figure out what's going on. That one's on time, that's on time, that's on time. So it's a great way to be able to see what's going on. You can also, it's a great way to assign people so they can walk up, they can see what they're being assigned to and go back to the workplace. So if you need to create more space and not everybody gathering around one area, this is another tool that you can use that can kind of create some safety. Any questions?
One question that I have here, specifically, there are a number of people that had KPIs before the COVID started, and we're working with those fairly well. They were developed and using them, but they're now pretty much irrelevant. The question is, how do you wait to change those metrics, or do you do new ones now, and how do you adjust? How often should those be adjusted?
Yeah, I mean, clearly things have changed. I mean, my metrics for my business have changed. I'm sure your both of your businesses' metrics have changed as well, but I wouldn't completely throw them away. If you have a certain number of goals for reaching out for clients in order to contact your customers, continue to do that. Maybe you can't have face-to-face meetings, but you can still call them. So I would look at each of your metrics and say, okay, things have changed, but I still need to, I might need to adjust things here or there, but I still have goals of my business that I need to achieve. So modify them based on where you're at, but don't give yourself a pass because, oh, COVID happened, I don't have to track how often I'm talking to my customers, because you do need to talk to them. You need to reach out and have conversations and continue to support people.
Good.
Don, you have any questions?
You've talked a fair amount about manufacturing or maybe process-oriented businesses, which many businesses are process-oriented. Are you aware of any more electronic measuring, online tools, things that, let's say, a service business could use, the people that are spending a lot of time on their computers, that would track process flow and delays or timeliness of delivery of services?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different systems out there, and yeah, it's not just about, I could get into some of the specific programs I'm aware of, but I don't think that's really what we're looking for. But I would say that you could use a project board like Trello or something like that if you're doing service, to kind of see where you're at and kind of track it that way. So you can use Teams, you're sharing documents. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that without necessarily having to be in the same place. There are systems that you can use that, but you still want to measure what you're doing and communicating if it's being effective.
Makes sense.
I think one of the things, Julie, that you said that makes a lot of sense is that the more visible these metrics are and the goals are and how they are connected to individuals will cause the changes to happen. And I think that's a really key important point here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about how we can kind of strengthen our team. As I mentioned before, we have an opportunity to really use the employees in order to move forward on this. And the employees have been sitting at home, or they've been maybe working, but in kind of a stressful environment as they kind of adjust to all this. And I believe that they've got ideas. They're ready to talk about how they can approach how they're doing work and how they can do it in a more effective and efficient way. So definitely have conversations about them, like, what do you think? What are our opportunities? What do you think our risks are? And make sure that they're involved in all of that. One of the things that I've really enjoyed is that we've had this focus on the whole being, because there's so much stress around, the unknown. When we first started this pandemic, it started to hit our economy. And one of my clients just, he was really struggling. He's working from home. His wife's working from home. He's got 2 young kids. And we got on a call with another owner, and he said, there's not a single person that didn't have tears in this house today. And obviously that really hit me. And he's like, I feel so much stress. I've got to keep this business going, and I got to take care of my kids, and my wife's having a hard time. And we were able to just kind of talk through it and say, all right, what can you do right now? And the other partner just kind of stepped up and said, I've got this, you go take care of that. And we were able to work through it. And honestly, that's really going to strengthen the team moving forward. So that's something that kind of makes me feel like we've done the right things for my clients, and to help them be stronger during this time. And the other thing is that we need to figure out how to incorporate some of these silver linings. And when I say that, I am not trying to diminish the loss of almost 100,000 U.S. lives and all the families that have been touched by that, because this is a really difficult time for a lot of people. But there are some people that have been able to look at this situation and find those silver linings. I have a colleague who said that he's been able to go over and play badminton with his daughters in the park in the middle of the day, something he never would have been able to do when he was at the office all day. I have another one of my clients that said, I'm so less stressed right now than I was when I was working out of the office. And I said, well, we need to figure out how we can minimize that stress as you go back to the office, because we want you to have that whole mindset that things are not quite as stressful as they seem. So we really want to spend some time kind of talking about those silver linings with our employees, and being able to incorporate those into this next phase of life and beyond. And the other thing I want to do is be able to build in some of the positives. I have a good friend of mine who is he's German, and he said, I love it. Everybody's on their call at 9 o'clock. Everyone's ready, and we'll have our meeting done in 30 minutes. And you got to love the German precision on all of that. But I think we've all learned how to do remote meetings, and Zoom and WebEx and all those other different options. And so we can have much more effective and efficient meetings. And I don't think there's anyone that would agree that having less meetings or shorter meetings is a positive. So I think employees have learned how to work from home and how to be effective and efficient. And the focus, like I said, is more on productivity and less on hours worked. And that's allowing people to maybe spend some more time exercising, more time with their families, and kind of have a more holistic approach to their work versus just going to work, commuting to work, doing it, and coming home. And the other positive is that we're starting to understand how the individual goals are impacting the company goals. And as you start to set your goals for your organization, as we move into this next phase of this pandemic, I think it's really important to take the goals, the company goals, drive those down to departmental goals, and then go down and focus on the goals of the individuals. I'm always surprised when I go and work with my clients that don't have individual goals and development goals for their employees. I think that's really an important part of developing the person to move into the next stages. And we talked a little bit about if you're trying to increase productivity and you've got people that could be redeployed somewhere else, that's great. That's great for them, and it's great for the company as well. So really spend some time focusing on the goals of the individual, because that's going to help support the goals of the organization. Any questions?
Julie, one of the questions for you specifically is, how do you encourage your employees when you're really disconnected from them? Do you have some ideas on how to provide strengthening the team, at least with encouragement and recognition?
From a distance, or
Yeah,
in
from a distance, or even if you can do it personally some other way?
I just believe that in your heart, you just need to, you care about them. And it's okay to show that you really care about them. And I sometimes feel like there's this kind of distance, so I can't do that. But when you genuinely open yourself up and just express how much that as an individual that you care about them, you will be amazed at what you can get from them in return. And it's not, I'm trying to get something, so there I'm going to do this. It's just when you kind of lay it out there, they're going to step up and they're going to want to be a part of your team.
Yeah.
So that's that communication, and how are you really doing? And people want to work for a manager like that much more than they want to make a lot of money. So
I think the challenge right now is that providing some clarity to leaders specifically on the value of embracing your employees even while they're at home or whatever is really significant. And the distractions tend to get in the way of, I've got too many things to decide or too many things to do, that I forget that I have people that actually have hearts and souls and need attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you may need to schedule that into your week, is so that you are spending an hour every week just thinking about your team and how you can support them. And maybe that's writing handwritten notes. Maybe that's just making phone calls. Like my daughter-in-law was laid off, and her employer, they called up and said, we have a box of food for you because you're not working right now, and we want to make sure that you're going to be okay. Perfect. And there's things that we can do that just show that we are all human, and that we care about each other.
Perfect.
So let's talk about how we can innovate. And as you know, innovation is a big fan of mine because that's my company name. So you have an opportunity to kind of look at what sort of wholesale changes do you need to make to your organization. And that could be maybe a model to modify what you're offering. And maybe you're going to look at distilleries are selling hand sanitizer. Ford started making ventilators. Subway's actually offering food delivery right now. There's a lot of different ways we can look at what we're selling and how can we change that based on the time that we're in. So you want to kind of be open to looking at what you're selling, but then also how you're going to be selling it and how you're going to approach the market, because that's going to be a little bit different as well. I think that as somebody who loves to sell and who is used to being out on the road and meeting with people, I mean, your approach to how you're selling is going to be critical. And you still want to have some revenue goals, and you want to set some goals on new accounts and all of those things that you need to do, but you might need to change your approach. And for both of these, looking at wholesale changes to the business or changing sales and marketing, you really want to identify kind of what your critical success factors are, and then put an action plan together in order to be able to achieve those. And I do have a process that I kind of go through with my clients it's really effective, and it can help you all kind of get unified behind a common goal, identify those critical success factors. And I won't bore you with the details on how I do it, but I will tell you that there hasn't been a single person I haven't finished doing this with that hasn't said, wow, that was really fun. So if you need some help kind of figuring out how to kind of figure out what those opportunities are, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to have that conversation with you. I think you can also, when this first happened, I reached out to my sales clients, and I said, all right, let's define success. What's it look like? So every month we have some goals, and we've been kind of working through that. And we've also said we need to do some training. So I spent some time with my clients doing some sales training, and I even made them do a little bit of remote remote role playing, which they hate doing role playing, but it's amazing how much your skill set can improve when you are actually on the, when you're having to kind of role play with your peers. It's actually more stressful for doing it with your peers than it is with your customers. So definitely take advantage of this time in order to sharpen the skill set of your sales team. And then you also want to look at your supply chain. And, you know, this is something that's been a little bit of a concern because like VW is trying to start up their plant, but they can't start it up because they're missing one little tiny bolt from one small supplier. So take a look at what your supply chain is and see where your weaknesses are. You may have an opportunity to look at vertical integration. So maybe there's some suppliers that could really, that if you brought that in-house would actually strengthen your offerings to your customers. The other thing is you might want to look at some strategic partnerships. Maybe there's some downstream or upstream suppliers that if you came together, you could strengthen both of your organizations. And the other part is that maybe it's time to look at a different process or different material, different approach to some parts of your supply chain. Because if your customers are looking for some product from you and you aren't able to provide that because you're having some weaknesses in your supply chain, they're probably much more interested and willing to start to explore some different ways to approach getting their equipment from you or their supplies from you. So just start to think about what maybe I need to use some R&D time right now to come up with a new way to make this particular bolt, or maybe a different process for making it, and just start to think outside the box, because your customers are gonna appreciate you thinking about that, and you may have an opportunity to create leverage some of this new technology and separate yourself from your competitors.
Julie, one question, just thinking about cash flow management and financial projections, considering that wholesale changes to the business model, or let's say even the products that are manufactured, or modifications to your sales and marketing process, or even impacts on your supply chain, how do you try to integrate the impact on revenues and expenses and ultimately cash flow and profitability into this process?
Okay, I'm gonna ask how do we incorporate those? Ask me the question one more time.
How would you suggest that a business owner incorporate these particular type of innovations or changes into forecasting the results that may occur as a result of these changes?
Okay. I think that the first thing is just to be clear on what the goals are, and kind of look at, you know, best case, worst case, kind of lay it out that way and decide how much money am I going to be willing to invest in this new opportunity in order to make sure that I can get the return on investment that I need, and be smart about kind of how you're going to go about doing that. I mean, it is tough to say, I don't know if this is going to be successful or not, but if you're a small player and you're trying to get a small percentage in an industry, you're probably going to be much more successful than if you're a big company and you're kind of turning, because you're going to have a higher percentage of increase in the new market or the new offerings in order to be successful. So I think it's a matter of kind of understanding where you are in that particular industry that you're trying to pivot into, and what percentage you would need to get an increase in order to be successful.
Perfect.
John, one of the other things we often look at is specifically focus, the idea that you can't do everything at once. And so if there's a couple of things that you can start and move through and finish, then you're much more effective than if you try to do a bunch of things and get them just a little bit up the hill. So that's how focus is a critical piece in this innovation process.
Excellent. Okay, so this brings me to the end of my presentation. If you are, I put together an assessment that you can take just kind of to judge your preparation for kind of leveraging new opportunities as we move into this next phase. And you can either email me to get that, or I've got a link that'll be in the PDF of this presentation that you can also click on. And once you've taken the assessment, if you share your email address with me, I'm happy to reach out. We can set up a 30-minute consult and we can talk about how I can help you, or kind of answer some questions on how you can prepare yourself in order to leverage these new opportunities. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Let's maybe put up the next slide in case somebody wants to reach out to you. They can take a look at these email addresses, phone numbers.
Yeah, and so here's all of our contact information. And just a reminder that the final webinar in this series will be next Wednesday at 12:30 Pacific time. And it'll be Scott Phillips will be talking about how to replan and re-prepare.
Great job, Julie.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.